Introducing Anita Erasmus. Anita is the business manager of UAfrica.com, an e-commerce technology company that has developed a custom-built shipping solution which helps online merchants to streamline their shipping and selling processes. The business was founded by Andy Higgins and Jaco Roux, both esteemed entrepreneurs in South Africa's e-commerce industry. Anita completed her honors degree in financial management at the University of Stellenbosch in 2011, as well as an MBA at Stellenbosch Business School in 2016. Welcome, Anita.
Hi. Thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate it. It's really an honor to be here today. So I'm just going to start off quickly with sharing my screen. So that create some slides. So if everybody can just give me a few seconds to get that done. Just a second there. Okay. Okay, no, sorry. Present, wrong button. Okay, so yes, as Adam has mentioned, and I think as everybody can see on the agenda, my topic for today is basically e-commerce in South Africa, the symptoms of COVID, and the question if will it last. So when I went through the agenda and looking at all the speakers, I have to say I was quite, maybe a little bit intimidated. There's some very, I think, qualified people attending the event today and some very well-known brands. Brands, for example, DHL, Visa, Woolworths, and I think that gives everybody a very good understanding of what the company does. So I thought of starting off today just to kind of set the scene a little bit. UAfrica Technology is not necessarily that well known. We probably are well known within the e-commerce space in South Africa, but maybe not so much for people attending the event from the rest of Africa. So what does UAfrica do, and who are we, and why am I here today, and what's kind of given me the right to share my opinion of how COVID has affected e-commerce in South Africa. So as Adam has mentioned, we are a digital platform that assists online merchants in South Africa with the fulfillment of parcels. So in a sense, we are the glue between a lot of online stores in South Africa, as well as e-commerce companies with, courier companies within South Africa. So we're kind of in the middle between these two companies, which gives us a very good, and myself, a very good perspective of how COVID has affected not just the online store and the typical e-commerce entrepreneur, but how it has also affected the courier companies in South Africa and the logistic partners, because as we all know, that is a very, very important part of the e-commerce process. So let me just move on to the next one. So my topic today is kind of going to look at the before, the during, and the after. And I want to kind of look at how did e-commerce look in South Africa before the COVID pandemic? How is it looking during? Because in a sense, we are still in that space. And what are we predicting for the after? How is the future of e-commerce in South Africa looking like? And that's kind of how I would say my talk today is structured. So looking at the before, I think one thing that there's obviously a lot of statistics out there. And in 2018, I'm just looking at basically before, I would say March 2020. So in 2018, online stores in South Africa sold about 14 billion rands worth of goods, which representing about 1.4% of the total retail market. that is a very small number still. If you compare it to countries like the USA, that represents about a total of 20%. So it really indicates to us that there was, within, let's say, before the COVID time, 2018, 2019, still a lot of potential for growth within the e-commerce market in South Africa. And for us to even get close to the 20% where first world countries like the US is at the moment, or was at that time. That amount or percentage is probably even higher now. But I was thinking, there's a very famous saying by Mark Twain that states there are three kind of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. So rather than just throwing a lot of stats, I think at you guys today, and obviously a lot of the presentations beforehand has also touched on this, I was kind of going to go with the perspective of looking at how COVID pandemic has affected UAfrica, a company that was within the midst of this whole change, that worked closely with about 2,500 online stores within the South African space, and that also worked with quite a lot of courier companies, and also give you a little bit, not just general statistics, but what was our experience and what did our stats look like. It's probably not as much, a very small sample size for those of you that know surveys, but I do think it gives a very true and honest perspective of what a kind of startup SME company in South Africa experienced over the past few years. So what did we experience in 2018, 2019? So from the Africa perspective, we really only started our current product in 2017. But as you guys can see that from the graph here on the slides, is that from 2018 up until about March 2020, we did see quite substantial growth in the e-commerce space from our company perspective on the amount of shipments being conducted via our platform. So you can really see a steady growth on a kind of a yearly basis. And then as you guys will see the peaks there, that is the what we call usually the Black Friday, Cyber Monday, obviously festive season areas where the number of fulfillments increase a lot. So it's really clear that there was already a lot of growth within the industry, even though it was growing from a low base. But it was definitely a growth on a month-to-month perspective. We also saw a lot of SME entrepreneurs, the smaller guys, consuming the e-commerce market, in a sense, trying it out and wanting to start online stores. So there's a very big appetite from an entrepreneurial perspective in South Africa, trying to enter the e-commerce market in that time period. I think from our perspective, there was a bit of a slower uptake from bigger traditional retailers in South Africa. They kind of knew they had to go and change their traditional retail model, but there was a bit of a slower uptake in terms of e-commerce and really, I would say, fleshing out that part of the business. And the same we saw with e-commerce logistics companies or just logistics partners, is that they knew e-commerce had potential, they could see the growth, but it's as if they weren't already investing as much as we think they had to in technology to be able to offer a really good service to the business to consumer model. So that kind of gives everybody a perspective of where we saw e-commerce being before the COVID period. So the question kind of now probably persists is, how did it look during that period? And as I've stated before, we kind of probably, in a sense, still within the space. Obviously, last year, 2020, there was very strict lockdowns, and the levels of the COVID was a lot higher in South Africa. So maybe looking at what did we experience in the year of 2020. And once again, just looking more at the stats that's out there and what the people found, there was quite a lot of studies done during that period, is that goods sold in online stores went from about 14 billion to about 30 billion, which is about 100% growth within 1 year. That was a survey done, I think, by Deloitte. It was quite a nice survey that they compiled with about 1,500 respondents. And one of the main reasons, as you can see on the graph, was that they asked the respondents, why did you shop more online in 2020? And as you guys can see, most convenient and due to COVID-19 was two of the highest percentages. I think that is not a surprise for anybody. But it is interesting to be able to actually see that response in terms of a survey. Then also, first online purchases. So this was a survey that was done by Visa, where 64% of the respondents stated that during the COVID pandemic was the first time that they bought groceries online, as well as the first time that they bought pharmaceuticals. 53% stated the first time they bought pharmaceuticals online. So I think that also really gives us an indication of it was change in behavior, getting customers that hasn't bought certain products online or that hasn't bought online was kind of forced within the environment that COVID created to go and make that change and go and buy something online. So the general thinking and feedback out there is that there was obviously substantial growth within the year of 2020 in the e-commerce and the digital space due to the environment that COVID created. So what was our experience at UAfrica? So as I've mentioned before, we conduct shipments via our platform. And as you guys can see at the first graph, it's UAfrica shipments per day. It really just gives you an indication of how the trend looked like during the peak of the COVID pandemic last year. So you can see the start of the graph is January 2020. The big dip on the 4th, which was the month of April, hard lockdown, level 5, not a lot of trading happening. And then in May, e-commerce opened up, and you can see how the graph just climbs, and the massive growth of about 200% that we had from before COVID to after COVID perspective. And that was just really an indication how there was a change in consumer behavior and how a lot of customers that didn't buy online beforehand started purchasing online. I think it was twofolded. So what we saw from our side is that there was a growth in our current customers, but on UAfrica side, we also saw growth in new registrants, people signing up. So as you can see at the bottom graph, UAfrica accounts registers per month. If you want to make use of our service, you need to register. And we obviously saw a massive spike in that as well during that period. What I think it's also important just to note is that it's not as if there was a massive spike and then a massive decrease after a month or two. That levels, obviously the level of growth wasn't maintained, but it was in a sense stabilizing, and it was then growing from that base of where the growth took place. So our experience within the environment, there was really in a short period of time, an adoption of e-commerce within the South African consumer market. As I've mentioned before, we also work quite closely with e-commerce, with logistic companies. So we do have a lot of experience within the last mile delivery space of e-commerce. And one of the major courier companies that we work with during the period of February 2020 and February 2021 also saw about a 70% revenue growth. And that just really indicates you how it was filtering through the value chain. It wasn't just online stores getting new orders, but also from a delivery perspective, how that industry has grown with the change in how people are buying products and how they are conducting retail within South Africa. So something I just want to touch on before I kind of answer the question that I think a lot of you are wondering. Okay, Anita, great. You've given us some stats. You've explained the UAfrica experience. But the question is, I think for a lot of people is, will it last? What is the future looking like? Will these growth levels be maintained? Before I get to that point, I just want to discuss how I think, and it kind of will, I think, be the starting point of my argument in terms of that, is how the COVID pandemic has changed how e-commerce is viewed in South Africa. So first of all, from a consumer perspective, one of the disadvantages, previously when I would do presentations and you would list, let's say, the positive and the negative of e-commerce, one of the drawbacks was the fact that e-commerce is this lack of human-to-human interaction. But come to think of it, that was actually the one characteristic of the industry that facilitated growth over the last 2 years. So something that was always seen as a disadvantage was the one thing that really pushed the industry in South Africa to kind of reach that next level. Because people were buying online, because it was safer, because of less human interaction. So I think it really should make us think that when something is seen as a disadvantage, it should not necessarily be always like that, but it should kind of be seen as a positive, and how that can be a differentiating factor to the traditional retail. So with that said, that forced a lot of consumers to buy online. And I think one of the change in the view of e-commerce is also the typical e-commerce customer in South Africa. There was a very slow uptake in the older, I would say above 50 age group, target market of people buying online. It was a lot more the younger consumer. And during the last year, we've definitely seen an uptake in where these older, I won't say old, not that I say 50 is old, but the older target market were kind of forced to change their behavior. They were the high risk individuals, and that kind of forced them to buy online. And we see then once they've made this step once, that they start trusting e-commerce more, and that they were buying online even more. MobiCred, that's a credit facility that you can buy online in South Africa. They found that most of the new registrars during last year was above the age of 60. So it just really shows you how it kind of changed the consumer behavior and how they perceived e-commerce in South Africa. And I truly believe that is something that will filter through for the years to come. And it won't just necessarily be the short-term spike, but it's really changed how South Africans buy retail products in the country. Then also just secondly, from a logistics perspective, as I've mentioned before, we work with a lot of the bigger courier companies, and we've also seen how the COVID pandemic and this obviously massive increase in demand has changed their perception of e-commerce in South Africa. As we all know, and I think a lot of speakers today will touch on it, that logistics is a major part when it comes to successful e-commerce and being able to grow an e-commerce industry within a country. From our side, we've definitely seen how logistics companies has started to transform their operations to not necessarily be as much business to business focused, which was traditionally in South Africa how logistic or e-commerce companies operated, but to be more business to consumer focused. And that's a very different type of delivery. And it requires them, first of all, to, I think, invest more in technology to be able to offer a better service from a business to consumer perspective. And then also, secondly, what we've seen is that they're becoming more competitive in terms of pricing. So pricing and delivery are super important for e-commerce industry to thrive. And South Africa has always kind of been marked as that delivery is still extremely expensive. We've definitely seen, I think, also as competition has increased from a courier perspective over the last year or so, couriers are willing to drop their prices and becoming more competitive, which is amazing for the e-commerce industry, and that will also facilitate growth moving forward. So in summary, how does the after look like? After kind of sense after COVID, how does the future look like? So I think the general consensus is that while growth rate is still expected, they do expect it to be subdued if we look at the year of 2021. But it's still expected that the expected to top online retail to top the 40 billion, sorry, and account for about 4% of retail in South Africa. So if you take it back at the beginning of my presentation, in 2018, it was estimated to be 1.4%. At the end of 2021, it's estimated to be 4%, and that's quite substantial. As well as the fact that there's some stats that 2 in 3 respondents will shop online in 2021. Will shop more online. So I think that is also quite exciting, where consumers are indicating that they think they will shop more online in the year of 2021. So from a statistics perspective and the general consensus out there, yes, we do believe that we won't necessarily see as much growth as last year, but that there will definitely still be a lot of growth potential within South Africa. What I also wanted to show you guys, I have no idea what my time limit is. So if I do get cut off and where I am, but let me just quickly try and summarize. From the UAfrica perspective, as I've mentioned before, we work with a lot of e-commerce merchants. And as you guys can see on the right-hand side, in terms of some different online companies that we're working with, obviously I can't state their names, but you will see there, the first graph is the furniture company, the second one is clothing, and then homeware. And I just wanted to show you guys the growth before the COVID pandemic, and how, obviously, as you guys can see, it's very consistent, how there was this massive spike, but also how these companies were able to maintain these levels in terms of growing from that increased base. So it's really exciting to see where the e-commerce industry in South Africa will be going to. I think there's still a lot of potential. And as the industry, the different, I would say, partners within the industry that makes out the value chain of e-commerce in South Africa, if they're able to work closer together, from the e-commerce store to the logistics provider, to the supplier as well, and the end consumer, we'll definitely see e-commerce in South Africa, I believe, growing, maybe not at the same rates, but growing within the years to come, and becoming more efficient, and offering an even better service to the end consumer, which will hopefully increase demand as well. So yeah, everybody, that's everything from my side. Thank you for your time today, and yeah, good luck to all the other speakers. And yeah, Adam, thanks for a wonderful event.